It was a late afternoon when the FBI director decided to leave the office and drive home. The day had been long, filled with meetings, reports, and briefings. There was a soft glow of the evening sun reflecting off the city streets, giving a calm feeling that contrasted with the intensity of the day. The director preferred this time of day for driving as the roads were quieter, and it gave a moment to reflect on the day's work. The car moved smoothly along the suburban roads. There was nothing unusual, just the quiet hum of the engine, the occasional passing car, and the soft chirping of birds settling in for the night. The director's mind wandered through the events of the day. There were challenges at the office, discussions about ongoing cases, and the constant pressure to make decisions that could impact lives. Despite all this, driving alone offered a rare sense of peace. Suddenly, a flash of red and blue lights appeared in the rearview mirror. The familiar pattern of a police car signaling to pull over broke the quiet atmosphere. The director immediately slowed down and safely moved to the side of the road. This was a routine procedure for anyone, but for someone in law enforcement, it brought a mix of respect for protocol and curiosity about why they were being stopped. The police officer approached the car quickly. The director rolled down the window and greeted the officer calmly. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I was stopped?" The officer, however, seemed unusually tense, his movements rigid and his tone sharp. There was a flicker of impatience in his eyes that made the director cautious. As a professional accustomed to handling high-pressure situations, the director maintained composure. Hands remained visible on the steering wheel, voice steady, and eyes meeting the officers calmly. The director introduced themselves, explaining their position, expecting the officer to recognize the authority and respond accordingly. But the officer ignored the introduction, continuing with the questions in a demanding tone that didn't match the situation. The director noticed small details. The officer's grip on the firearm was firm, the stance overly aggressive, and the tone unyielding. Despite this, the director spoke clearly, trying to de-escalate the situation. Every word was measured, aiming to maintain safety and control without challenging the officer unnecessarily. Time seemed to stretch as the interaction continued. The director's mind raced through possible explanations. Was there a misunderstanding? Was the officer simply following a procedure but overstepping boundaries? Every professional instinct was alert, assessing risk and response carefully. The suburban street, quiet moments before, now held a tension that felt almost tangible. A few cars passed slowly, their drivers likely noticing the unusual exchange. There was a soft breeze rustling the leaves, but even the natural sound seemed to fade under the intensity of the moment. The officer suddenly ordered the director to step out of the vehicle. The demand was firm, leaving little room for negotiation. The director complied, hands raised slightly, and carefully moved out of the car. The gun was drawn, held at the director's side, an action that immediately raised the stakes. Despite the danger, the director remained calm, remembering years of training and experience. The mind focused on safety, the voice calm but assertive. "Please, officer, let's clarify this. I'm willing to cooperate fully. I assure you there is no reason for this escalation." Each word was deliberate, designed to prevent panic and reduce the risk of violence. The officer's expression was hard to read. There was an undercurrent of confusion, a flicker of doubt, but also a persistence that refused to acknowledge the director's position. It became clear that this was not a simple traffic stop. The officer was letting authority and assumptions guide actions, rather than facts or professionalism. The director noticed the surrounding environment carefully. There was a house nearby with lights on, perhaps someone observing the scene. A few pedestrians walked at a distance, uncertain but aware that something unusual was happening. The director remained aware of these details, understanding that witnesses could help influence the situation positively if needed. Internally, the director reflected on the irony. Years of enforcing law, ensuring the safety of others and maintaining order, and now, facing a situation where the system itself seemed misaligned. Yet experience had taught the director the value of patience and composure. Panic would only worsen the situation. Calmness could prevent it from escalating further. Minutes passed with careful communication. The director kept hands visible, voice steady, responding to questions without confrontation. Each response was aimed at building clarity and ensuring the officer understood the authority and experience of the person they were dealing with. Finally, the director asked for identification and documentation, seeking to establish transparency. The officer provided it reluctantly, avoiding eye contact. The documents were reviewed quickly, and a slow realization began to appear in the officer's behavior. There was hesitation, an internal conflict between authority and professional procedure. The director sensed the change subtly, but continued to speak in a calm and measured tone. "I appreciate your attention to detail, officer. Let's ensure everything is clear and handled safely." The words were soft yet firm, showing respect while subtly reinforcing the gravity of the situation. As this unfolded, the director's mind was also reflecting on broader implications, how fragile authority could be in moments of miscommunication, how crucial professionalism was, not just for those enforcing the law but for everyone involved, how a single moment of tension could escalate rapidly if not handled with care. The officer took a step back, lowering the firearm slightly. The presence of witnesses nearby, the clear professionalism of the director, and perhaps an internal awareness of misconduct all contributed to this subtle shift. It was not yet resolved, but the first signs of de-escalation were visible. Throughout the encounter, the director remained aware of every movement, every tone of voice, and every small environmental detail. Years of experience allowed focus on both personal safety and the broader context. The goal was not just to survive the moment, but to ensure the situation remained controlled and accountable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the officer began to reassess the situation. The words spoken by the director were calm, respectful, and authoritative, highlighting the difference between genuine authority and aggressive assumption. This subtle shift in communication was pivotal. The director stepped back slightly, maintaining a non-threatening stance, signaling cooperation and patience. The officer's grip on the firearm loosened, but the tension was still present. Every small movement mattered, every glance measured. As the evening shadows grew longer, the quiet suburban street slowly returned to its calm atmosphere, though the tension lingered like a low hum. The director's mind continued to process the encounter, preparing for possible outcomes while maintaining composure and professionalism. It was a moment that highlighted the delicate balance between authority and responsibility. A reminder that professionalism, patience, and calmness were often the most powerful tools in moments of crisis. The director's training and experience had turned what could have been a dangerous escalation into a controlled, manageable situation, setting the stage for eventual resolution. As the encounter slowly moved toward clarity, the director remained vigilant, understanding that each action and word mattered. The situation was not yet over, but the foundation of safety, respect, and professionalism had been firmly established. The night air carried a sense of anticipation, and the director, with unwavering calm, prepared for what would come next. Knowing that every decision in these moments could define the outcome of a highly unusual and tense encounter on an otherwise ordinary evening, the tension on the quiet suburban street seemed to hang in the air like a thick fog. The FBI director remained calm, every movement deliberate, every word measured. The officer's grip on the firearm was still firm, but a subtle change in posture suggested a growing uncertainty. The director, experienced in high-stress situations, sensed this and decided to keep the conversation steady, ensuring nothing triggered further escalation. "Officer, I understand that you are doing your job," the director said calmly. "I want to make sure we are both safe. Please, let's take a moment and verify everything properly." The tone was respectful, non-confrontational, and carried an authority that came from years of experience. The officer's jaw tightened, but he paused, perhaps reconsidering his approach. Time moved slowly. Each second seemed to stretch, but the director used the moment to observe. The officer's uniform was neat, his badge shining, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a hesitancy in his eyes that told the story of a man caught between procedure and overreaction. Nearby, a couple of houses had their lights on, and neighbors were glancing from windows, sensing the unusual situation unfolding outside. The director realized that reasoning with the officer was essential. "I am carrying identification and credentials. Please, allow me to show them to you," the director said. The officer shifted slightly, and the firearm moved just enough to remind the director that the situation was still dangerous. Calmly, the director reached for the credentials, keeping hands in full view and voice steady. The exchange of information was brief but revealing. The officer glanced at the identification, the weight of the credentials slowly registering. There was a flicker of doubt in his expression. For the first time, it seemed he questioned whether his actions were entirely appropriate. Despite the tension, the director continued speaking softly, maintaining composure. "I am here to cooperate fully. There is no need for anyone to be harmed tonight. Let's ensure that everything is done correctly." The words were carefully chosen, meant to de-escalate without undermining the officer's authority. The officer's body language began to show small signs of change. Shoulders relaxed slightly, eyes darted around nervously, and the hand gripping the firearm loosened marginally. It was a slow, almost imperceptible shift, but the director noticed every detail. Years of training had taught the importance of observing subtle cues. Then a passerby walked along the street, slowing down as they noticed the unusual situation. The director acknowledged the person with a nod, signaling that everything was under control, while keeping focus on the officer. The presence of another witness seemed to add pressure, reminding the officer that his actions were visible to others. "Officer, I know this is unexpected," the director continued, "but I assure you I am here to comply with all necessary checks. Let's make sure everyone stays safe and that proper protocol is followed." The words were calm, patient, and deliberate, reinforcing a sense of order in the midst of tension. The officer's grip on the gun shifted, revealing a moment of hesitation. The director took the opportunity to remain cooperative, stepping back slightly to reduce perceived threat, yet maintaining eye contact to ensure communication was clear. "Is there a problem I can help clarify?" the director asked gently. The tone was professional yet human. It was not about asserting authority, but about creating an environment where reason could replace fear. The officer's eyes flickered toward the passing cars, the neighbors watching from windows, and finally back to the director. The tension seemed to waver, if only slightly. It was a reminder of how perception and environment influenced behavior, even for those in positions of power. Minutes passed slowly. The director's training in crisis management allowed a steady assessment of the officer's behavior. There were small signs of realization. The officer's posture eased, the voice softened, and the firearm was lowered ever so slightly. It was not yet safe, but there was movement in the right direction. The director considered every option carefully, knowing that even a small misstep could escalate the situation. Remaining calm, cooperative, and observant was crucial. Each word spoken was designed to reduce tension and encourage rational thinking. Suddenly, the officer took a step back, signaling a shift in control. The firearm was no longer aimed directly at the director, though it was still visible. This slight change brought a sense of cautious relief. The director continued to speak softly, reinforcing the importance of following proper procedure and ensuring everyone's safety. "I appreciate your attention to detail, officer," the director said. "Let's make sure all information is clear and accurate. That way, we can resolve this quickly and safely." The words were deliberate, maintaining authority while showing respect. The officer's demeanor continued to soften, but tension lingered in the air. It was clear that the officer had been influenced by personal bias or misunderstanding, and now faced the reality of handling a high-ranking law enforcement professional. At that moment, a colleague from the director's office called in to check on their safety. The director informed them briefly that everything was under control but requested support if needed. This action added another layer of accountability, signaling to the officer that external oversight was present. The combination of calm communication, visible credentials, and subtle external pressure gradually shifted the dynamic. The officer's behavior became less aggressive, and the scene began to feel slightly less volatile. The director continued to maintain a cooperative and non-threatening posture, using every word and movement to encourage resolution without confrontation. As the minutes went by, the officer finally began to step away from the strict aggressive stance, lowering the firearm further and allowing the director a small sense of relief. The surrounding environment, the quiet street, the observing neighbors, and the passing cars added to the awareness that professional behavior was expected and observed. Throughout this exchange, The director reflected on the importance of patience, awareness, and professionalism. The situation highlighted how quickly misunderstandings could escalate and how critical it was to remain composed under pressure. Every small action mattered, and the balance between authority and respect became clear in the tension of the moment. The officer, now showing clear signs of doubt and nervousness, began to ask questions in a softer tone. The director responded calmly and respectfully, providing clear explanations without confrontation. This subtle but significant shift demonstrated the power of measured communication in tense situations. After what felt like hours, but was only a few tense minutes, the officer finally started to recognize the credentials and authority presented. The director remained cooperative, stepping back slightly and allowing space, ensuring the situation did not escalate again. The suburban street, which had held a heavy tension moments before, slowly began to feel lighter. The presence of witnesses, careful communication, and professional demeanor combined to reduce the immediate threat. Yet the director remained vigilant, understanding that full resolution required continued caution and clear communication. Finally, there was a brief acknowledgement from the officer that the situation could be clarified and handled properly. The director maintained composure, ensuring that cooperation, respect, and professional behavior guided every remaining action. This intense exchange highlighted the importance of professionalism, patience, and awareness in high-pressure situations. It demonstrated how authority must be exercised responsibly and how calm, measured responses can prevent escalation and ensure safety. The director's experience and restraint allowed the situation to begin moving toward resolution, setting the stage for accountability and justice to follow in the coming events. The evening air felt cooler now as shadows from nearby trees stretched across the quiet street. The tension had eased slightly, but the situation was far from resolved. The FBI director remained calm, focusing on every detail and movement of the officer. It was clear that the officer was beginning to understand the seriousness of the encounter, but uncertainty and stubbornness were still present. The director continued to speak in a gentle, professional tone. "Officer, I want to make sure that everything here is handled correctly. If you have questions, I can answer them fully. We both want the same thing, safety and clarity." The words were not meant to confront but to guide, offering a path for the officer to correct the situation without losing face. The officer's hand was still near the firearm, though his movements had slowed, signaling a growing hesitancy. His eyes darted to the credentials displayed by the director, scanning the badge, reviewing the identification, and starting to realize the gravity of the error he had made. It was a delicate moment. Any sudden action could reverse the small progress made so far. Nearby, a few residents had noticed the unusual scene and were peeking from their windows. The director was aware of them, but did not let their presence distract from the focus on de-escalation. The knowledge that others were watching added subtle pressure on the officer, whose demeanor had become slightly defensive. "I am here to cooperate completely," the director continued. "I have no interest in causing conflict. Let's ensure this is handled safely, calmly, and correctly." The words were deliberate, a reminder of the professional and human responsibility on both sides. The officer seemed to respond to the tone, lowering the firearm a little further, though caution was still visible in every movement. The director's mind worked carefully, weighing the possibilities. Calling attention to witnesses, maintaining visibility of credentials, and speaking in measured sentences were all strategies designed to prevent escalation. Experience in law enforcement had taught the importance of clear communication and subtle influence in tense situations. After a few moments of silence, the officer asked a question, his voice slightly softer than before. The director answered clearly, providing explanations and guidance without any hint of condescension. It was a delicate balance, offering information while maintaining authority, ensuring the officer felt guided rather than humiliated. The night was quiet, except for the occasional sound of a car passing by. The surrounding calm contrasted sharply with the internal tension of the encounter. Every small detail mattered: the shifting shadows, the sound of footsteps on the sidewalk, the subtle movements of the officer. The director remained focused, aware that patience and clarity were the keys to resolving the situation safely. Slowly, the officer began to step back further, clearly processing the reality of the credentials and authority in front of him. The firearm was no longer pointed directly at the director, and the overall posture softened. It was a sign that reason was beginning to replace instinctive aggression. At this moment, the director made a careful decision. Maintaining a cooperative and non-threatening stance, the director spoke with calm assurance. "Officer, I know this may have been unexpected, but we can handle this correctly. Let's make sure there is no misunderstanding and that all procedures are followed properly." The words were carefully measured to encourage the officer to follow proper protocol while avoiding any sense of confrontation. The officer seemed to consider this, his eyes flicking to the credential again, then back to the director. There was a clear internal struggle visible between sticking rigidly to what he assumed was authority and accepting the professional truth before him. The presence of witnesses and the careful demeanor of the director added weight to this realization. Minutes passed, and the director remained calm, hands visible, voice steady. Every action was calculated to reduce tension while maintaining control of the interaction. It was a subtle negotiation of human behavior, patience, and authority, demonstrating the power of professionalism in high-stress situations. Eventually, the officer began asking more measured questions, seeking clarification rather than issuing commands. The director answered patiently, providing clear explanations that acknowledged the officer's concerns while reinforcing the professional facts. It was a turning point, as dialogue replaced confrontation and mutual understanding began to form. Throughout this, the director's experience provided a calm perspective. The officer was clearly nervous, and the interaction had moved from potential danger to controlled conversation. The subtle de-escalation highlighted the importance of clear communication, patience, and maintaining a human-centered approach in tense encounters. The director noticed small changes in body language. The shoulders relaxed further, the firearm lowered more, and the defensive tension in the officer's stance began to diminish. The situation was still delicate, but it was evident that the officer was beginning to recognize the seriousness and professionalism of the director. A neighbor, observing from a window, stepped outside slightly, showing concern but keeping a safe distance. The director acknowledged the presence with a slight nod, demonstrating that everything was under control while remaining vigilant. This small gesture reinforced the notion of accountability, making it clear that actions were visible and being observed. As dialogue continued, the officer began to verbalize an understanding of the error, asking questions to ensure proper protocol was followed. The director responded respectfully and calmly, emphasizing safety and correctness without creating conflict or humiliation. The conversation was a careful balance of reassurance, guidance, and professional authority. The evening sky darkened, but the quiet suburban street remained a controlled environment. The director used this time to subtly guide the officer toward acknowledging the proper procedures, focusing on human interaction, and avoiding escalation. Each word, gesture, and movement was intentional, demonstrating how professionalism could influence behavior even in tense and unusual circumstances. Finally, the officer stepped back completely, lowering the firearm to a safe position. The director maintained composure, acknowledging this change without aggressive action or unnecessary commentary. The situation had shifted significantly. The initial threat was now replaced by a controlled and professional exchange. The director reflected briefly on the encounter, recognizing how crucial patience, calm communication, and human understanding had been. The officer's initial aggression had been replaced by awareness and cautious compliance. It was a reminder of how delicate interactions could be, and how professional behavior could prevent escalation. By now, the dialogue had become constructive. The officer began following proper protocol, verifying information and asking questions that indicated a developing recognition of responsibility. The director continued to respond respectfully, ensuring that the interaction remained safe, professional, and controlled. The director's focus remained sharp, aware that the situation was not yet over, and that careful guidance was necessary until full resolution. Each moment required attention to detail, human behavior, and the subtle dynamics of authority and compliance. The professional approach had turned a potentially dangerous confrontation into a manageable situation. Slowly, the officer began to acknowledge the director's credentials fully, verbalizing an understanding of the professionalism being demonstrated. The director remained cooperative, reinforcing safety and proper procedure, guiding the interaction toward a resolution that respected both authority and human dignity. As the night settled around them, the director maintained awareness, ensuring that every step taken reinforced safety, accountability, and professionalism. The tension, though reduced, had been replaced by a careful mutual understanding and the gradual return to normalcy. The entire encounter highlighted the power of calm, measured communication, and human-centered professionalism. It showed that even in the face of misunderstanding or aggression, careful attention to behavior, patience, and respectful guidance could prevent escalation and create the conditions for accountability and resolution. The director had turned an unexpected threat into a situation that could be handled safely, setting the stage for justice and clarity in the following events. The street had finally grown quiet again, with only the occasional sound of a passing car or the distant barking of a dog. The tension that had gripped the evening was slowly easing, but the FBI director remained alert. The situation had begun to shift from a confrontation to an investigation, and the director understood the importance of remaining calm and professional until everything was fully resolved. After ensuring personal safety, the director stepped back and began to assess the larger picture. It was clear that the officer had made a serious error in judgment, reacting aggressively without fully understanding the circumstances. The director's experience allowed a clear view of the next steps: cooperation, documentation, and ensuring accountability. The first action was to confirm that the officer would follow proper protocol for reviewing the credentials and verifying the identity. The director communicated clearly, "Let's ensure that all information is correct and everything is documented properly. We need clarity for safety and accountability." The words were calm but firm, demonstrating leadership without escalating tension. The officer, now more composed but still showing signs of nervousness, began to follow instructions. The director observed carefully, making sure that the process was carried out accurately and safely. Each step was a reminder that professionalism could guide behavior, even after mistakes had been made. Nearby, the first signs of community attention began to appear. Residents who had witnessed the tense interaction were curious but stayed at a safe distance. Some had taken out their phones, perhaps ready to record or report the incident. The director was aware of their presence, maintaining a composed demeanor to show that the situation was under control. This calm presence helped reinforce that professionalism and careful behavior could de-escalate even unusual circumstances. As the officer reviewed the credentials and identification, the director remained cooperative and non-threatening, providing any information requested. There was a subtle but noticeable change in the officer's posture. Tension still lingered, but the defensive behavior had diminished significantly. It was a testament to the power of calm and measured interaction. Communication remained key. The director explained each action clearly, without raising voice or showing irritation. "This process helps ensure safety for both of us and anyone nearby," the director said. The officer nodded, slowly beginning to acknowledge the professionalism being displayed. This small recognition was a crucial step in restoring order and trust. Meanwhile, the director's colleagues at the FBI had been notified of the situation. Coordination with internal offices allowed backup and documentation to be ready if needed. This preparedness added another layer of accountability, signaling to the officer that oversight was present and that proper procedure must be followed. As the minutes passed, the officer's demeanor continued to shift. The initial aggression was replaced by careful compliance, demonstrating that the situation could now be handled within established procedures. The director maintained composure, ensuring that the focus remained on safety, clarity, and proper documentation. The director also observed the emotional and human aspect of the situation. Even law enforcement officers could make mistakes under stress, and the right approach required patience and understanding. Maintaining respect while asserting authority helped reduce the risk of escalation and set a positive example for all involved. At one point, the officer paused, clearly realizing the gravity of the earlier actions. The director spoke calmly, reinforcing the importance of transparency and accountability. "It's important that we handle this correctly, so that everyone understands what happened and proper measures are taken," the director said. The officer's nod indicated understanding and an acceptance of responsibility, a critical moment in the resolution. The director then reviewed the environment, ensuring no additional threats or risks were present. The quiet suburban street, once tense with the potential for danger, was now becoming a scene of professional interaction and careful procedure. Residents continued to observe from a distance, noting the calm, methodical approach that prevented the situation from escalating further. As the officer continued to follow proper protocol, the director remained vigilant, ready to respond if necessary but not initiating any unnecessary action. The focus was on ensuring clarity, safety, and accountability. Each step was a demonstration of how patience, clear communication, and professionalism could transform a potentially dangerous encounter into a controlled and safe situation. Finally, after thorough verification and discussion, the officer acknowledged that the situation was under control and that proper procedures had been followed. The director's calm and measured approach had prevented escalation, ensured safety, and created a foundation for accountability. The director reflected briefly on the lessons of the evening. Professionalism, patience, and respect could prevent misunderstandings from turning into tragedies. Even in moments of fear or misjudgment, careful communication and human-centered behavior could lead to resolution and understanding. With the immediate situation resolved, the director prepared to leave, ensuring that the officer continued to follow proper documentation and reporting procedures. This ensured that accountability would be maintained even after the encounter ended, reinforcing the importance of integrity and responsibility in law enforcement. As the director drove away, the quiet street returned to its normal rhythm. The evening had been a test of patience, professionalism, and human judgment. It had demonstrated how calm and careful action could prevent danger, ensure safety, and maintain accountability. The director knew that the events of this night would serve as an example for future training and reflection on the human elements of law enforcement and public interaction. The entire incident had highlighted the delicate balance between authority and responsibility. It showed how professional behavior, clear communication, and human-centered action could prevent escalation and lead to accountability, even in unexpected and tense situations. The director left with a sense of calm and purpose, knowing that every decision, every word, and every action had contributed to a safe and just resolution. The officer involved had been asked to follow proper reporting and documentation procedures. The director monitored the process carefully, ensuring that every step was transparent and thorough. The goal was clear. The incident had to be recorded accurately so that any future review would reflect the truth. Maintaining integrity in reporting was as important as maintaining safety during the event itself. With the documentation underway, the director observed the officer closely. There was a visible shift in demeanor. The aggressive stance had been replaced by cautious reflection. The officer seemed to understand finally the gravity of the actions that had taken place and the potential consequences. It was clear that accountability was beginning to set in. The director took a moment to consider the wider implications. Incidents like these were not just about one officer or one individual. They highlighted the delicate balance of authority, responsibility, and human judgment. Even well-trained professionals could make mistakes under stress, and these mistakes could have serious consequences if not managed correctly. The FBI director remained calm, knowing that the proper response now was guidance and oversight, rather than confrontation. The officer, recognizing the professionalism and patience demonstrated, began to cooperate fully, answering questions and confirming facts. This careful interaction ensured that the process was thorough and respectful, preserving the dignity of all involved while reinforcing the importance of procedure. Meanwhile, internal channels within the FBI were activated. Supervisors and internal affairs were informed, and procedures for reviewing the incident were initiated. This coordination highlighted the importance of systemic accountability and reinforced that mistakes, no matter the rank or position, must be addressed and corrected. Throughout the process, the director remained composed, speaking softly but firmly when necessary, ensuring that the officer understood the significance of the situation and the need for accuracy in reporting. Every action was deliberate, aimed at creating a controlled professional environment where truth and responsibility were paramount. As the night deepened, the officer began to acknowledge the error openly. There was a quiet recognition of the consequences of overstepping authority and acting on assumption rather than fact. The director listened attentively, maintaining a demeanor that was both understanding and authoritative. This balance helped the officer feel guided rather than condemned, reinforcing the human aspect of accountability. The director's focus then shifted to ensuring that the lessons from the evening would be preserved. This was not just about one incident. It was about creating an example of how calm professionalism and adherence to procedure could prevent escalation and ensure justice. The encounter would be reviewed in training and internal discussions, providing valuable insight for future interactions between law enforcement and the public. Finally, after careful documentation and discussion, the officer was escorted to the next stage of internal review. The FBI director ensured that all necessary information was shared, making certain that the report reflected the full context of the encounter, including the professionalism displayed and the steps taken to de-escalate tension. As the officer was taken into custody for misconduct review, the director reflected on the personal and professional impact of the night. Moments of fear and aggression had been transformed into learning and accountability through patience, communication, and measured action. It was a reminder of the human capacity for both error and correction, and the importance of responding with integrity and calmness. The director then returned to the vehicle, finally able to leave the street behind. The quiet of the night offered a moment of relief, but the events lingered in thought as a reminder of responsibility. Driving through the suburban roads, the director considered the fragile nature of authority and the power of professionalism in guiding behavior, even in unexpected circumstances. News of the incident began to circulate, but the director focused on the factual account, ensuring that reports were accurate and human-centered. The emphasis was on safety, accountability, and lessons learned, avoiding sensationalism while highlighting the importance of correct procedures and human integrity. The FBI director's actions during the encounter became a benchmark for handling high-stress situations with patience, calmness, and professionalism. By maintaining composure, respecting human dignity, and ensuring procedural clarity, the director had prevented potential tragedy and set an example of responsible authority. By the end of the night, the immediate crisis was resolved, justice was on its way, and the lessons of the encounter were clear. Professionalism and human-centered behavior had not only preserved safety but also ensured accountability. The incident served as a testament to the power of patience, careful communication, and the importance of following procedure even under unexpected and tense circumstances. The FBI director's experience that evening was both a challenge and a lesson. It demonstrated that authority carries immense responsibility, and even small errors can have serious consequences if not addressed properly. It also showed that calmness, respect, and measured action could transform potentially dangerous encounters into safe, accountable, and instructive experiences. As the director returned home, the sense of relief was tempered by reflection. The evening had been a test of judgment, patience, and human understanding. It had proven that maintaining professionalism and a human-centered approach could prevent escalation, ensure safety, and create a path toward accountability and justice. In the quiet that followed, the director knew the story of the night would resonate far beyond the street where it unfolded. It was a story of authority exercised with responsibility, of human error addressed with patience, and of professionalism that prevented tragedy. The incident would serve as a reminder that even in moments of misunderstanding and fear, calm, human-centered action could lead to resolution, safety, and justice for all involved.